Hello and welcome to the presentation of my master's thesis on the needs of train travelers and enhancing their trip experience. My thesis was done in Aalto University School of Engineering in a cooperation with SBB, the Swiss Federal Railways. This program is a part of the EIT Sustainable Urban Mobility Master School in Sustainable Urban Mobility Transitions. And my entry year of this double degree program was in KTH Royal Institute of Technology. The supervisor of my thesis in Aalto was Dr. Milos Mladenovic, and I got guidelines and guidance from my advisor in SBB, Laura Macedo. Let's start with an overview of the topics of today's presentation. First, I will give an introduction of the topic and talk about why it is relevant. Then I will phrase the research questions that will try to be answered in this thesis. What will follow is a literature review of the available literature and the background. We'll then talk about the methodology that was used in this thesis, and I will present you the results that were found in this thesis, together with the discussion of these. And from the discussion of the results, we will then give some short-term and long-term recommendations that SBB could implement. Okay, so the introduction and the relevance of the topic. So as you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic led to a lot of changes in the travel patterns of people. It also led to changes in travelers' needs because of that, in terms of when they travel, what they need to travel, and so on. Another reason why this topic is relevant is that there is still a lot of potential in public transport for the leisure travel market. So far, public transport is mainly focusing on commuting. And again, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought some challenges to commuting and operators only depending on commuters. So there is still potential to research a bit more on the needs of these leisure travelers. There is also still a lack of research concerning some extra services that can be offered in combination with a train journey, such as, for example, seat reservations or lockers in the stations, food and drinks in the train, and so on. And finally, this thesis was also motivated because of SBB's wish to research on a potential new product, which would be like the combination of such services that I just mentioned in a package, which will also be called bundle in the following presentation, so that several services related to a train journey can be added together in one bundle and sold. So let's phrase the research questions of this thesis. The main research question was, what can enhance the experience of a train journey for commuters and leisure travelers, assuming that the basic needs are already met? The sub-questions to this are then, what are the needs of commuters and leisure travelers in Switzerland and in Europe in general when they travel by train? What are the most popular choices for the service bundles? What differences in service choices can be seen between trip purpose and travel class groups? As well as, how do travelers wish to purchase these service bundles? So it can be seen that this first sub-question was tried to be answered by using the background literature and available literature review, while the other three questions were mainly tried to be answered with the own methodological part, the survey that was done, which will be seen in the following slides. But first, let's go about the literature review. So when it comes to the needs of train travelers, we have to differentiate between more basic needs and higher needs, which can be seen in this pyramid. This pyramid is very similar to Maslow's famous hierarchy of human needs pyramid, which most of you might know, which has which was adapted for transportation. In transportation, at the bottom, so the most crucial aspects here are the safety, security, time, and so on. And then at the top of the pyramid, you can see that there is comfort and convenience, which will also be the topic of this thesis. So the thesis will basically be in the peak of this pyramid. meaning that we have to really be aware that in order for this peak to be successful, we also need the stable base of the pyramid already to be existing. Further background research was done on the travel time use. So how is travel time being used by travelers? Because there is like a lot of different options, of course, to use travel time when traveling by train. On the one hand, there are productive activities. On the other hand, there are recreational activities. Productive activities can be, for example, working in a train, writing mails, and so on. Recreational it does not have to be an actual activity like reading a book, but it can also be just looking out of the window and relaxing. And different activities are done depending on the trip purpose, but not only depending on the trip purpose. Also, it can happen that, for example, work travelers do not only work in the train to work, but they also might use this time and actually need this time to relax in between different stressful parts of the day or an appointment. So this was also found. Last but not not last but not least, but another point is that I looked into the practice theory aspects as well of traveling. Basically, practice theory is saying that transport patterns and like how people move is not just the decision of the individual himself and the fully controlled decision, but it's also always influenced by the structures around. So meaning the material structures on the one hand side, the infrastructure that is available, the pricing that is there for public transport, for example, all kinds of structures that are there, and then also societal structures. For example, how is the work schedule? How are school schedules? Can you actually travel all of this by public transport, or do you need a car to really make it in time between these societal, between these appointments that you have? So the last aspect of the background review was this emotional experience of a train journey. The authors, Van Hagen and Braun, in 2014, they argue that many train operators are currently like really focusing on operational aspects of train journeys, meaning that they focus on travel time, they focus on maximizing seat capacity in trains. However, that not enough attention is given to the actual emotions that travelers feel during a journey. And the authors argue that especially for leisure travelers, the emotional experience of a journey can have a big impact, because they experience emotions stronger than work travelers. Since they are looking forward to their destinations, they see the travel itself sometimes as a joyful activity, while work travelers have to travel, or they're so-called must travelers, according to Van Hagen. And the authors also say that the emotional experience of a train journey is not like after a train journey in the past. A train journey in the past is not being rated just based on the average experience that you had on the journey. That's usually rated based on two parts of the journey, which are on the one hand side the peak of the journey, on the other hand the end of the journey. The peak can, for example, be the moment when you board the train, just after you managed all of this stressful situation at the station, not being sure if you find a seat, if you're in the right platform. Then you get into the train, you really get your seat, you lie down, you're comfortable. So this could be the peak of the journey. And the end of the journey, of course, is when you arrive either at the station or then at your home or workplace. So these are really the parts of a journey where the emotions can be felt the highest, and where there might be a lot of potential to add services, for example. Let's talk quickly about the Swiss public transport system and SBB. So SBB is Switzerland's largest public transport operator, or to be more precise, it's a train operator. SBB is a joint stock company under a special law in Switzerland. And it's important to say that the government still owns 100% of the shares and also has special voting rights in the company. SBB owns most of the train stations in Switzerland, which can also be important for some services that they offer. So they have the control over these services and the station in most cases. And yeah, so when talking about the Swiss public transport system in general, we can say that it focuses on simplicity, integration, and reliability. So what simplicity means is that there are simple and stable timetables for not only for regional trains running in regular times, but also long distance trains, which run usually every half an hour or every 1 hour, meaning that there is like an easy to understand network. The integration the integration is both in terms of the timetables. Timetables are integrated between different trains, so that really connections are possible. But they are also integrated. But there's also high integration between different operators, meaning that, and between the ticketing, meaning that you can. So on the one hand side, the timetables of different operators are really matching, are really integrated, so that you can also change between operators in an easy way. And the ticketing is also, one ticket is available for all operators together. And of course, this system really relies on, what is crucial in the system is high reliability, because if trains were not punctual, this integration and these changes would actually not work. So punctuality and ensuring connecting services are really important in the reliability of the service. Okay, so in this thesis was mainly about the services that are offered in connection to a train journey. So let's talk about some of these services. These services are in the following categories. First of all, there are bike-related services. These are, for example, secured bike parking at the station. There are also carriage of bikes and trains, bike sharing, scooter sharing, first last mile services, bike rentals, and so on. Then there are other direct mobility services, which can be, for example, which is car sharing and taxi or Uber. Food and drink services, of course, can be both at the station or in the trains. And it's important to say that this thesis focused on long distance trains, and these long distance trains, almost all of them are equipped with either a restaurant or another small bistro where you can buy snacks and drinks. Luggage related services is mainly two services. On the one hand side, luggage lockers and luggage storage at the station where you can leave your luggage. On the other hand, you can also let your luggage get transported from your home or from the station to the final destination, so you don't have to carry it with you. Some other services at the station are restrooms. Restrooms, meaning clean restrooms that you usually have to pay an access fee for. So that's also considered a service here. And the car and the park and rail parking spots that are available at many Swiss stations. Other services in the train are, for example, seat reservations. There are also entertainment portals or magazines or e-magazines, as well as newspapers. Okay, let's go over to the methodology that was used for this thesis. So this thesis used an online survey to find out about the traveler needs and related to these services that I just described before. We have to say that this is still an early stage of research on the bundling of such services in connection to a train journey. So SBB is still an early stage of that. So it is mainly about gaining a general overview of the popular services and the choices that people make for their bundles at this moment. And in future research following this thesis, SBB can then go more into detail in these services that prove to be popular or that prove to be interesting in another way in this research that was done in this thesis. The sampling was done based on the so-called SVP customer voice. SVP customer voice is basically a group of SVP customers, a pool of SVP customers that agreed to be contacted for service interviews and other new products that SVP wants to test out and get feedback for. So it was possible to contact them, which was done. Random emails were sent out, and random sampling was done by sending out invitation links by emails to these people. And it's important to mention that it was only sent out in German to German-speaking persons. And Switzerland is a country, as you might know, that also speaks French and Italian. And but the German-speaking part covers around 60% of the country. However, there's future research needed about the other parts of the country that don't speak German. Okay. Here you can see the structure of the survey. First of all, the categorization was made depending on the most recent trip that people made, of at least 45 minutes in the train in Switzerland with SVB. The 45 minutes were chosen as a boundary of long distance trips, since this makes sense between for many connections between large Swiss cities to set this boundary. So people were first categorized by travel purpose, depending on what their purpose was on the last trip. So if someone chose that the last trip was a commuting trip, then they were classified into this work, education, and business category. If they chose leisure, they were categorized as leisure. And then if none of these applied for the last trip purpose, they were categorized as other and then screened out from the survey. Okay, so after this, the survey participants were then categorized as well by travel class based on their most recent trip. Travel class meaning either first or second class, depending on what they did on the last trip. Other questions followed about this most recent trip, like what was the more specific reasons of leisure travel, like what kind of leisure activity was done. Also, were you traveling alone or with how many people? Then the most important questions of this survey were the service ratings on the Likert scale, the service bonding, and the open-ended questions. Service ratings on the Likert scale was the first question. That wasn't the first question, but in service ratings of the Likert scale, the participants were presented with a list of 15 of these services that I just mentioned before, that they could rate each of these services on a scale from 1 to 5, meaning that from 1 to 5 in terms of the potential to increase their travel experience. Then the service bundling question was essentially a question where participants could choose up to 4 services that they want to bundle together in a package for themselves. So out of these 15, they could select up to 4, but they didn't have to select exactly 4. And for these services that they selected for their bundle, open-ended questions then followed about these services, which asked participants what their more specific needs are for this service, why they chose this service, what they're still missing, and so on. After this, it was then asked if there is a general interest in buying such a bundle, and if yes, how. So participants were presented with the option to select like a daily, a one-way ticket, a monthly ticket of such a service bundle, and then this was analyzed. And the survey ended with collection of some socio-demographic information, as well as information about what kind of subscriptions participants hold. Okay, let's talk about the survey analysis. It has to be said that partially completed surveys were also included. They were not deleted, but the data had to be cleaned. So whenever data did not make sense, for example, someone selected that they didn't choose any service, but they also selected some in the list of 15 services, then this Like this data entry was deleted in all cases. Data was also cleaned in terms of the people who were screened out. These data rows were completely deleted, of course. Yeah, and then based from this data, graphs were created in Microsoft Excel. It has to be said that the differences that were found between first class and second class, between work and leisure trip purposes, they were not tested for statistical significance. So there's a certain level that, so you need to be careful with interpretation. Also because the survey, as you will see, did not represent exactly the overall average, the overall population of SBB customers, as will be seen in the results. So yeah, the results can be seen here. We can see that around 1/3 of the participants had their last trip as work, education, business related, so they were categorized into this category, while around 2/3 were leisure related travelers. It was also found that that these categories of 50 years to 64 years and 65 years and older, they contained 60.8% of all study participants, so a very high number of old people as well in the survey of seniors, which can also bring a slight bias to the survey, because these people many of them might be retired already and have therefore have different needs than someone who is still in a working life. Another thing that was observed based on the background data of the survey was that together around 49.5%, so almost every second person, held either a first or second class GA subscription, which allows for unlimited travel in Switzerland. In reality, this is more around 10% or 20%, but not around 50%. Okay, so let's look at the first graph. Services used on the last trip, first and second class compared here. So we see that in general, bike-related services were selected very rarely, not very often, as well as other mobility-related services, car parking, car sharing, taxi, and so on. In seat reservations, we saw a difference that first class did many more seat reservations than second class, the last trip. And it can also be seen that second class, more than first class, did not use any services on their last trip. When looking now at the differences between the trip purposes, we can see, for example, that leisure travelers did more seat reservations than work travelers, which was a bit surprising, because they usually do not have to travel at peak hours when trains are full. Then buying food and drinks at the station was seen as the most popular for both work and leisure travelers, the most popular service that was used on the last trip. And leisure travelers leisure travelers more often than work travelers did not use any of these listed services on the last trip. Okay, this table now shows the service ratings on the Likert scale from 1 to 5 that I mentioned before, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest rating. So what we can see, for example, in the differences is that between first class work and first class leisure, there's quite a big difference in the average rating of services. First class leisure really rated these services higher than work travelers, first class work travelers in average, whereas you can see for second class, there is no such big difference between work and leisure purposes. Okay, the seat reservations, we can see that in general, first class, that in general, leisure travelers rated seat reservations higher than work travelers, both in first and second class. And second class travelers even though services were popular, even though food and drink services in the station and in the train were popular for both first and second class travelers, first class rated these services higher than second class. This correlation matrix now shows the correlations between some of the services from this rating question. So it can be seen that, for example, food and drinks at the station correlates very high with food and drinks in the train, as well as locker storage correlates very high with luggage services, meaning that these services could be alternatives for each other. Okay, these are the results from the service bundles. So this shows which services were selected most often for the bundles, that people could choose a maximum of 4 services. And what can be seen is that in terms of the differences, it can be seen that first class work travelers really selected parking spots at the station much more than other travelers. Then, for example, it can be seen that in general, included access to restrooms at stations was very, very popular, with first class preferring this for work trips, whereas second class preferred these services, this access to the restrooms more for leisure trips. In a similar note, food and drinks in the train, it was seen that the service was quite popular for all of them except for second class leisure travelers. It was still popular for the second class leisure travelers, but much less than for other groups. Okay, so these 2 graphs now show the preferred bundle types that people chose. In general, so people could choose, like I said before, between bundle for 1 day, for a day, multiple days, for a month, or not to buy any bundle at all. So around 30% said that they don't want to buy any bundle at all, meaning that around 70% at least show a general interest in such bundles. With all of these possible, with 1 way and with daily, with multiple days being quite similar in popularity, and big drop in the monthly bundle popularity, meaning that people probably do not want to purchase these bundles for a whole month where they have to pay for the whole month, but just for specific days where they want to use it. Okay, so let's go to the discussion. The most popular services overall were a restroom at the station, seat reservations, as well as food and drinks in the train. For restrooms, this could be an indicator that having to pay for restrooms can be frustrating and also a bit bad for the emotional experience and the trip experience. For example, one comment of one traveler was that it bothers me every now and then that you can't go to the toilet at the station without complications. In terms of seat reservations, it was surprising that leisure travelers selected these seat reservations more often than work travelers. Yeah, but which could be interpreted that leisure travelers pay more attention to a comfortable journey in general. They might also have to travel sometimes at peak hours, meaning that they're not completely free always to travel outside of peak hours. And food and drinks in the train was also a bit surprising that it was selected more often by work travelers than leisure travelers, which could be an indicator that this service, that people who chose this service for work-related travel, they might not think about getting a full meal every day in the train, but more about smaller services like coffee and snacks, or a drink or a breakfast, instead of like really a whole meal in the train. It was also found that first class leisure travelers seems to be the most promising segment to sell such bundles, to offer such bundles. However, it also has to be said that this group was already found to be the group with the highest satisfaction. Like this was found in the beginning of the survey as well. And as I said before, around 2/3 of participants showed a general interest in purchase of such service bundles. Let's briefly mention the limitations of this thesis. It was not an exact representation of the SBB customer population, since the customer voice was used. was not tested for statistical significance, as mentioned before, was limited to German-speaking Switzerland and not to the French and Italian, and was not including the French and Italian part, which still has to be done in future studies. And it was a stated preference survey, which always has some difference to the actual behavior of people. So yeah, let's give some recommendations for SVB. Qualitative research going more in depth should be done following this thesis. And then SVB could define a number of bundles and pilot these, and also test these bundles in terms of the willingness to pay that people really have. SVB could also consider including certain services and subscriptions or for first-class passengers, since there were a number of open answers that said that they were not happy with, not very happy with the services that were offered in first class, or that they wish some more appreciation for the loyalty. So that would also be a potential use case for such services. It's also important in the longer term to observe how traveler needs are further evolving with further changes in work patterns, in technological development, and so on. Also, it's important to ensure that travelers can use their travel time in a satisfactory way in general, which might be done in such a simple way as providing big tables where you can place laptops, also place other things, and so on. But then also, yeah, with other measures. It's also interesting to think about how trip experience for leisure travelers could be enhanced in general, because this group of travelers is very, experiences emotions much higher than commuters, as was found by other studies. Therefore, to gain more leisure travelers, this would be interesting. So here you can see the sources of the figures and tables that were used in the thesis. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation.